Alright, there's no easy way to cover this topic, so we're just gonna get right into it. The ongoing saga that is the Tate brothers is something that likely won't end for quite some time. As I would love to avoid covering topics that are purely reactionary to drama and gossip, I'd like to come at this from a more informative angle. I'll be upfront and objective as possible, and for anybody who's either undecided or out of the loop as to why this topic even matters, hopefully this video will be of some help. I'll be honest and say that I had no idea who Andrew or Tristan Tate were till probably a year ago. I would often see clips of Andrew Tate in sunglasses and an expensive suit talking about concepts such as the Matrix, or giving advice to men on how to find a, quote, woman of worth. Now, I'll be honest and say that for me, there is very little appeal to anything that anybody in the manosphere has to say. I've seen grifters and fakes, such as Jack Murphy, try and pitch their exclusive members-only boys club, where sad lonely men pay them $100 a month to teach them how to, quote, be a man. As somebody who didn't do the whole player scene and who got married at 23, and now has 3 kids and a loving wife, this kind of thing has zero appeal to me. And for all the younger guys watching this saying, yeah, well, it's not that easy these days, the truth is dating and marriage has never been easy. Women have always fallen for the bad guy. Women have always been drawn to men that have charisma, wealth, power, height, good looks, etc. This does not mean that you cannot find a woman of worth if you don't possess all these things, despite what some grifters online will tell you. But the reality is that it would seem that there's never been a generation worse at dating than Gen Z. Record numbers of young men are single, virgins, and labeled as incels, or involuntary celibates. This largely could be a byproduct of the amount of hostility that's thrown around online, social media presenting altered and skewed versions of the ideal self, the amount of mental illness being celebrated these days, whether diagnosed or self-imposed, or the overall emphasis put on superficial constructs of status or popularity. Along with these things comes an increased level of hostility towards traditional male behavior and gender roles. It doesn't help that so many young women have fallen prey to the idea that they can both exploit their own sexuality on sites like OnlyFans and still find a man that values them. You can thank radical feminism for this, but the sad reality is most men are afraid to compliment, flirt with, or even initiate a conversation with a person of the opposite sex these days. Chivalry didn't die on its own. It was brutally murdered, its body left for the crows to pick at. This is where people like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, Jack Murphy, and the entire manosphere really comes in. Now, I'm hesitant to lump Jordan Peterson into the manosphere because I truly believe that Jordan is not just trying to sell his books or get more views on his podcast. I believe he truly has a heart for young men and cares deeply about what he's doing. Some would say he's not masculine enough due to his propensity to crying, but to be fair, I don't judge a man based on how often he cries, more on what he chooses to cry about. I don't cry often, but I was brought to tears the day that my dog died, and off and on for weeks after. A nostalgic song or movie scene can still make my eyes water no matter how much I joke about being dead inside. Being in control of your emotions as a man doesn't mean that you have to be afraid to show them from time to time. I know this has been a lot of exposition, but I think it's important that you all understand that I know what men are going through, and I can sympathize with the way that masculinity is under attack by Hollywood, the mainstream media, and academia. It doesn't shock me that a man who's willing to speak his mind and put his name on the line has generated a lot of fans among the younger generation. Andrew Tate is as influential as he is polarizing, and there's no doubt an attempt to silence him from both governments and media organizations around the world. This is where my view on the two sides of the story begin to diverge. On one hand, we have Andrew Tate the man, who I have utter contempt and disgust for, which I will get into in a minute. And on the other side, we have Andrew Tate the political prisoner, who may very well be being held without sufficient evidence or due process. I'm using a thread from Crabcrawler on Twitter, who's been doing an incredible job documenting every new development regarding the Tates. I'll link his Twitter in the description so that you can see all the evidence for yourself. Now, let's start with Andrew Tate the man. Before anybody who finds themselves to be sympathetic to or is an avid fan of Andrew Tate decides to tune out of this video, all I can ask is that you give me a couple minutes to hear me out. I'm not insisting that any moral or character flaw that the Tate brothers may have is justifiable with prison time. To be clear, I don't believe in hate crimes, hate speech, or censorship. Nobody should have their freedoms taken away for a wrong opinion. However, what I find troubling is the level of cult-like worship exhibited by Andrew Tate's biggest supporters. This is never more evident than in the way that they all believe he's, quote, helping men. Now, anybody who knows who Andrew Tate is will no doubt by now know who Eliza Bleu is. If you're unfamiliar with her, I have a few videos on her that you could go back and check out. Long story short, she claimed to have evidence of 2 women that were trapped by the Tate brothers, and ever since Eliza's own personal story of being trafficked has been virtually debunked online, this has been considered a massive win for Andrew and Tristan Tate. But this is what baffles me. In all the fervor that Tate enthusiasts have for denouncing Eliza as a grifter who never actually helped trafficking survivors, none of them have taken the 2 minutes required to ask themselves, what has Andrew Tate done to help any man besides himself? Here are the actual accolades of Andrew and Tristan Tate that are very well documented at this point. He recruited girls to come work for him at his webcam business by tricking them into thinking he loved them and would marry them if they were loyal to him, in a technique that's been dubbed the quote lover boy method. After getting them to agree to model on campsites and OnlyFans, he would then brand them like cattle with his name in the form of a tattoo, take most of the money for himself, and have them recruit other young women into the lifestyle. His head recruiter he referred to as his bottom bitch, a common phrase that a pimp would use for his right-hand whore. There are even accusations that he has messaged girls as young as 15 to try and recruit them. It may not be illegal in Romania, but as a father who happens to be Andrew Tate's age, I can say that if true, that's fucking disgusting. He has also compared himself to Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, that Jeffrey Epstein. In his online course that he charges money for, he explains how men can follow his example and get rich off exploiting young women because they, quote, can't think for themselves. His words, not mine. He even explains how he has to sleep with all his girls, at least 400 or more, so he claims, and that sex is meaningless to him, but rather a tool that he uses to establish control. Sounds like a very emotionally stable guy. He has his, quote, war room, which is basically his members-only club where different influential and famous people have been present, such as Jack Murphy pal and online know-it-all Mike Cernovich, as well as former all-pro porn star Ron Jeremy, aka the man whose brain is too rotted to stand trial for his rape charges. Apparently not so well known is that Andrew Tate also recently converted to Islam. How, I'm not quite sure, because he believes that, quote, the Islamification of the West is the only thing that can bring back traditional conservative values. That was me paraphrasing, but you get the general idea. For anyone listening who actually thinks this is a great idea, I would implore you to take your sister, your girlfriend, or your mother to any country that's run as a Muslim theocracy, and then see if you still agree with this statement. It would also be disingenuous to even label him as a Muslim, because just 4 years ago he was an unapologetic atheist before dabbling in Christianity. And from the discourse I'm seeing online surrounding Sidney Watson's lawsuit against The Blaze, I'm assuming most Tate fans don't believe an atheist can be a true right-winger. Andrew Tate has supporters because he's willing to say that wokeness is shit and that men need to be men. I couldn't agree with him more. But what I don't understand and perhaps never will is the worship of a man who exploits women, then uses them to exploit men via parasocial interactions like OnlyFans, all while personally enriching himself while proclaiming that by you listening to him, you will somehow find someone of worth. My question to Andrew Tate is, if his advice works, why isn't he already retired, happily married, and raising his kids rather than sitting in a jail cell in Romania? Let's move on to the actual charges. The Tate brothers are currently being held in Bucharest on charges of rape, human trafficking, and running an organized crime ring. What set off a lot of alarm bells for many of his sympathizers is Tate's frequent remarks about the, quote, matrix coming for him. Anyone who's been paying any attention lately knows who that's probably referring to. He also had recently regained the use of his Twitter account a few weeks prior to being detained by Romanian authorities, after previously being yeeted off of every social media platform. This timing seems incredibly suspicious. Another major red flag has been the lack of credible evidence against the brothers for the trafficking charges. After the Eliza Blue fiasco, it's hard to say what does and doesn't constitute actual human trafficking. But when women who aren't physically forced at threat of harm or restrained from moving freely choose to engage in sex for a fee, that's where things get a bit more murky. While what Andrew Tate did may have been immoral and unethical in deceiving women into becoming cam girls for him, how do you prove they were brainwashed or forced into doing it if they say they weren't? It's kind of like trying to convince a cult member that they're not in a cult. Only in this case, how do we know that they're in a cult and not acting of their own free will? There are conflicting accounts of girls who worked for and love the Tates versus the claims of the girls that are working with Romanian authorities. This week, a document that supposedly proved that the girls were making up the whole story set the internet ablaze. What all these reactionaries online didn't realize is it was only part of a text conversation that in its entirety supports what the girls claimed, as much as it might also exonerate the Tates. Since the trafficking comes down to a lot of he said, she said, let's move on to the organized crime allegation. Unfortunately for the Tates, this might be what actually gets them prison time. There's a mountain of video evidence as well as emails confirming that they willfully broke various laws while running their casinos and traveling across Europe. Andrew boasts that if you're rich enough, you don't have to follow the same laws and talks about bribing authorities. There are even recordings of him saying this while speeding past police on video. There are emails regarding the purchase of fake passports and IDs. He even explains in a Twitter thread how he shakes down people that steal from him, mobster style, taking back more than what he lost. But what could be the final nail in his coffin is a video that leaked where he explains that he used Bitcoin to evade paying taxes, which is illegal in many jurisdictions. To be fair, I despise paying taxes, but until something is done to abolish or reform the IRS, there's not much we can do about that. These are only a few examples of the times that he boasted about engaging in criminal activity. Add into this the accusations of trafficking and rape, and it's hard to feel sorry for a man that has put himself at the center of so much controversy. All that being said, I hate to think what the justice system in a place like Romania is, when citizens in the US are still wrongfully imprisoned for the weakest, quote, insurrection attempt of all time. In closing, I don't know if the Tates are innocent or not. More than likely they're guilty of something, but to what degree I can't even guess. I'm gonna assume that regardless of whether or not they are found innocent, their most loyal fans will only believe what they've convinced themselves of. That Andrew is innocent and being unfairly persecuted by malevolent forces that are simply trying to silence him due to his massive platform and influence. While part of that may be true, whether or not you choose to build this man into some sort of role model to aspire to is entirely up to you. Personally, I'll take the crying Canadian psychologist over the atheist-turned-Muslim webcam pimp. If you made it this far in the video, I'm extremely grateful. Hopefully I've earned your subscription and look forward to seeing you again here. Until next time.